Everybody. Okay, good to see everyone. Have a couple of things for you guys at the top. Yesterday we made history. Kyrsten Clark was confirmed as the first woman and first woman of color to lead the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice. And Shaquita Brooks LaShure became the first Black person to be confirmed as administrator for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Kyrsten's career was launched in the office that she now leads. She personally prosecuted crimes based on hatred and bigotry, human trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault. She has served at two of the nation's oldest civil rights organizations, where she worked on everything from voting rights to equal education and employment. At the Department of Justice, she will continue advancing civil rights progress, including on police reform. Shaquita is a lifelong public servant who has worked at OMB, on Capitol Hill, at HHS, and at CMS, where she helped implement the Affordable Care Act. Shaquita brings a wealth of knowledge to CMS, where she will work to strengthen Medicare and Medicaid, bring down healthcare costs for American families, and advance health equity in communities across the country. The president was proud to nominate Kyrsten and Shaquita for these positions, thanks the Senate for their bipartisan confirmation, and is honored to have them serve in these key leadership positions. As you all saw yesterday, we announced that next Tuesday, June 1st, the president will travel to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and deliver remarks to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Black Wall Street Massacre. While there, he will meet with surviving members of the community, now between the ages of 101 to 107, and tour the Greenwood Culture Center. We'll have additional details as we get closer to Tuesday. As you all know, President Biden believes affordable, safe housing is the foundation upon which families build their lives. And he knows that stable housing will remain out of reach for tens of millions of Americans, even after COVID-19 pandemic and economic crises come to an end. Across the country, there is 300,000 unit gap in annual housing supply. 11 million families pay more than half their income on rent. 3 million families with children under 6 reside in homes with lead paint, and thousands of working families are displaced every year as a result of extreme weather fueled by climate change. These changes are even more severe in low-income communities and communities of color, which have been segregated, excluded, and neglected for generations. Investing in housing is an essential part of President Biden's strategy to grow strong, healthy communities in every zip code. So today, the administration is releasing 2 new fact sheets highlighting some of the key housing elements of the American Jobs Plan. The president's plan proposes a bold $213 billion investment in America's housing infrastructure through a number of federal programs and proposals with bipartisan support. This investment is paired with expansion of bipartisan tax credits and incentives to lower barriers to affordable housing in more and higher opportunity places across the country. Together, our estimates suggest this will enable the construction and modernization of more than 2 million affordable and sustainable places to live. Along the way, these investments will create and sustain hundreds of thousands of good-paying union jobs and provide employment and economic opportunities for residents of assisted housing. As you may have seen by now, today the president asked the intelligence community to redouble their efforts to collect and analyze information that could bring us closer to a definitive conclusion and to a report back to him in 90 days. Back in early 2020, the president called for the CDC to get access to China to learn about the virus so we could fight it more effectively. Getting to the bottom of the origin of this pandemic will help us understand how to prepare for the next pandemic and the next one. As we have done throughout our COVID response, we have been committed to a whole of government effort to ensure we're doing everything to both understand and end this pandemic and to prevent future pandemics. This is why the president is asking the U.S. intelligence community, in cooperation with other elements of our government, to redouble efforts to collect and analyze information that could bring the world closer to a definitive conclusion on the origin of the virus and deliver a report to him again in 90 days. It will be another whole of government effort, as I mentioned, including work by our national labs and other agencies. Importantly, we will continue to pushing for a stronger multilateral investigation into the origins of the virus in China. And we will continue to press China to participate in a full, transparent, evidence-based international investigation with the needed access to get to the bottom of a virus that's taken more than 3 million lives across the globe. And critically, to share information and lessons that will help us all prevent future pandemics. With that, Zeke, will you take us away?
Thank you, Corinne. First, on that last bit about the calls for China to cooperate with these international investigations, what are the consequences for China if it does not, if it continues its current posture, which has not been to allow for a free and independent investigations into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, right now, we're just going to focus on the president's announcement on the 90-day investigation, a more deeper investigation to really look at the core of how did we get here, right, with this pandemic, and where the origins clearly of COVID-19. And once we get to that, conclusion, we'll have more to share.
So, but in terms of cooperating with the WHO investigations, there's nothing new from the White House in terms of encouraging China or penalties for China if it does not cooperate with investigations going forward?
I'm not going to prejudge or make any pre-announcements at this time. We're going to go with the 90-day investigation and see where it takes us from there.
On that 90-day investigation, is the White House committing to making the results of that investigation public?
We'll have more to share after the 90 days.
And then finally, just on this, the president's statement noted that at least one member of the intelligence community was leaning in the direction of there being a potential for a laboratory accident involved. Which member of the intelligence community was?
I don't have that information to share with you right now. I think the most important thing is that the president has made a decision to make sure that to get to the core, right, to really figure out where did the origin come from, to do this additional 90-day review after asking his team to look into it in March. So he wants to take that next step. Yeah.
Thank you. Has the president been briefed yet this morning on the shooting in San Jose, California, and any other details you can share with us? Who may have briefed him?
Just give me 1 second. So the White House is monitoring the situation, and our hearts go out to the victims and their families. I know local officials have addressed this publicly, and there is an ongoing investigation, as we all know. We will continue to stay in close contact with them and offer any assistance as needed. We still don't know all of the details, but what's clear, as the president has said, is that we are suffering from an epidemic of gun violence in this country, both in mass shootings and in the lives that are being taken in daily gun violence that doesn't make national headlines. That's why he has already taken an initial set of actions.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst. It's Wednesday, May 26th. So we have some spiciness coming out of the Capitol with Senator Elizabeth Warren, and I wanted to share this this video with you and react to it because she is not giving up and holding Jamie Dimon and the big banks accountable for basically taking advantage of people during the pandemic. Let's roll this clip.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the pandemic swept across our nation, bank regulators worried about the health of our biggest banks. So the regulators were generous. They gave the banks all kinds of help. They delayed compliance for important regulations. They relaxed standards. They even allowed banks to avoid paying overdraft fees if their accounts at the Federal Reserve had a negative balance. Now, when asked why they were being so generous to the banks, the regulators explained that the banks would, in turn, help their customers. So how exactly did that work out? At the start of the pandemic, bank regulators issued joint guidance that recommended that banks waive overdraft fees for their own customers. In other words, if someone was laid off, for example, and bounced a check, the regulators recommended that the bank automatically waive the fees and let people get caught up without paying $35 every time they stumbled. The same way the bank could do at the Fed if it overdrew its account. So let me ask the CEOs of the four banks, Citibank, Bank of America, Chase, and Wells Fargo, the four banks that collectively manage tens of millions of checking accounts for customers. While you automatically and at no cost got complete protection from overdraft fees at the Federal Reserve, could you please raise your hand if you gave the same automatic protection to your customers and automatically waived all of their overdraft fees? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone raise a hand, and that's because none of you gave the same help to your customers that the bank regulators extended to you. Help that the bank regulators recommended that you give. So let me focus in on this just a little bit here. Let me start with you, if I can, and ask the question about whether or not any of you didn't automatically waive. I just want to take this on down. So let's take a look at who actually paid these fees. According to Pew Charitable Trusts, it's disproportionately working people making less than $50,000 a year, African Americans, Hispanics, people who are struggling to get by. And how much did they pay in overdraft fees? They paid a combined $4 billion. So let me start with you, Mr. Diamond. You are the star of the overdraft show. Your bank, JP Morgan, collects more than 7 times as much money in overdraft fees per account than your competitors. So, Mr. Diamond, how much did JP Morgan collect in overdraft fees from their consumers in 2020?
Well, I think your numbers are totally inaccurate, but we'll have to sit down privately and go through that.
These are public numbers.
And I also want to point out we did not overdraft.
Can you just answer my question?
We
How
did
much
not
did
overdraft
JP
the
Morgan
Fed.
collect?
We did not overdraft at the Fed account. And at any request,
So you never,
said they needed,
I'm sorry,
they needed
Mr.
COVID
Diamond,
relief.
that was,
They got
Mr.
$120
Diamond, that
million
was not the
COVID relief
question.
on request.
Did you had an automatic protection. So I'm asking, you were recommended, the regulators recommended you offer that same kind of protection to your customers.
And
How much, in fact, did
And
JP
we
Morgan
did.
collect in overdraft fees from their customers in 2020? Do you know the number?
I don't know the number in front of me, but
Well, I actually have the number in front of me.
Upon
It's
request,
$1.463 billion. That's nearly $1.5 billion that you collected from your customers. Now, do you know how much JP Morgan's profit would have been in 2020 if you had followed the recommendation of the regulators and waived overdraft fees to help struggling consumers? In other words, without that overdraft money, would your bank have been in financial trouble?
We waived the fees for customers upon request if they were under stress because of COVID.
You know, I appreciate that you want to duck this question. Do you know how much your profits would have been if you'd actually waived overdraft as the regulators recommended?
We waived the fees every time.
The answer is your profits would have been $27.6 billion. I did the math for you. So here's the thing. You and your colleagues come in today to talk about how you stepped up and took care of customers during the pandemic, and it's a bunch of baloney. In fact, it's about $4 billion worth of baloney, but you could fix that right now. Mr. Diamond, will you commit right now to refund the $1.5 billion you took from consumers during the pandemic?
No.
Right now?
No.
No. That's right. Over the past year, you could have passed on the breaks that you got from the Fed to your customers, but you didn't do it. Everybody else here, those other 3 bankers, will any of you agree to refund the overdraft fees that you collected? I didn't think so. So no matter how you try to spin it, this past year has shown that corporate profits are more important to your bank than offering just a little help to struggling families, even when we are in the middle of a worldwide crisis. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So this is, I mean, I wanted to watch this in the full video because this exchange is extraordinary. This is a man whose banks have put money in the pockets of both Democrats and Republicans, as we know. This happened just as right now in Washington, they're having these hearings left and right, and they're related to the pandemic. Simultaneously, to just today, Nydia Velasquez, who's a congresswoman from New York City, slammed the Biden administration and Janet Yellen in particular, because Janet Yellen, who is, and this is on a small business committee, the House chair of the Small Business Caucus is Nydia Velasquez, so just some context. But she slammed Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen for declining to appear at a committee hearing, saying that specifically she's disregarding the law, that you can't decline. Even Stephen Mnuchin, he showed up at these hearings. And it's all over the fact that the Biden administration has been slow to roll out PPP for a Paycheck Protection Program in partnership with the Small Business Administration. whose administrator is Isabel Guzman, who did testify on Wednesday, which is today, of course. So this is all happening simultaneously. Like, you have the banking industry, which ruthlessly refuses to reverse these overdraft fees, which they can, of course, afford to do so. And that is what Elizabeth Warren was making the case for, that they're going to get the profits no matter what. Not only that, they're getting bailed out in different ways and forms. But if they're going to get bailed out, then they need to take care of the people who, without a choice, had to stay home, were not able to work. How many contractors decided you had no choice but to stay home? Or, now you have this crisis with Uber drivers and Lyft drivers where they're not working because they realized it was a smarter option for them to be there's not as many drivers available, a smarter option for them to stay home and have at least some sort of government supplement, I guess, because their wages were so low. So it's interesting to see this dynamic play out. The ramifications, what we're dealing with right now in Congress is how our economy is going to survive after COVID. And I don't think that there's any sense right now of how bad it's going to get, whether it's Senator Warren taking on the big banks right now and saying you have to do something because people were literally dying and you were charging them overdraft fees because they couldn't show up to work, they couldn't pay for their groceries, they couldn't even get access to groceries, they were living off of credit if they had credit, being evicted from their homes, and you thought it was fair to charge $35 in overdrafts for each overdraft? So good on her, and I hope she holds her fellow senators who are not usually supportive of taking on big banks. I hope that she holds them accountable for backing her up, because this is a working class issue. And simultaneously, good on Congresswoman Velasquez for calling out Janet Yellen, who is supposed to be like sort of the progressive Treasury Secretary. She can't even show up. She can't even show up for a committee meeting because the Biden administration has been slow to roll out their promises in protecting small businesses. How many small businesses cannot afford to pay their rent, have not paid their rent? The statistics last year in New York City alone were jarring. It was over 70% of small businesses had not been able to pay their rent, and then the number just kept climbing. We don't know what the evictions crisis is even going to look like yet. We don't know how many small businesses are going to shut down yet because there have been all these promises for assistance. So while the big banks are getting bailed out once again, working people, small businesses are suffering. That is disaster capitalism, because who swoops in and takes advantage of those empty storefronts? Who swoops in and buys out or takes up all that empty real estate because people have been evicted, or small and mid-level homeowners and landlords can't afford to keep their properties anymore? It's the big real estate companies. It's the banks that win. It's the big companies. This is what happens. So we have to do something. Washington has to do something, because we still don't even understand how bad this economy is. We still don't understand what the numbers are going to look like. We still don't understand how many people are going to be unhoused. And the Biden administration is frozen right now. Or maybe they're behind the scenes talking about how far they can go with these industries that helped get them in power and the Democratic Party in power. All right, we have a wonderful show today. It is Wednesday, and I guess I'm having some video problems here. I did not know this. Let me take a look. What's going on with my video? Are we good? Hopefully it's okay. But we have a wonderful show today. We have Daniel Levin, who's going to be on to talk about his new book. Okay, I am frozen. Am I not? I'm sorry, guys. I am in a new place. Daniel Levin is the author of Proof of Life, 20 Days on the Hunt for a Missing Person in the Middle East. And then later we have Zakarin and Natalie Shure to talk about today's news. I'm going to try to figure out what's going on with my my video. We'll be back in a second.
Hi there.
Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. I think we're good on video. I was having a little bit of a connectivity issue. This is what happens when you are on an island where disaster capitalism has been present, and that is we are in, of course, San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I'm constantly having issues with power to this day. Daniel Levin, thank you for joining us. He is the author of Proof of Life: 20 Days on the Hunt for a Missing Person in the Middle East. Daniel Levin, you spent your early years as a son of a diplomat in the Middle East and in Africa. So I imagine you've come into this with a different lens. There you are. So Daniel, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us, this is a fascinating story that you've laid out. You were at your office when you got a call from an acquaintance with a cryptic message. Can you tell us what happened?
I can. Thanks for having me, first of all. This is in late 2014. I run a foundation in Europe that works in war zones and failed states all over the world, really. A lot of Middle East and Africa right now. And we had been involved in Syria early in the civil war, 2012 and early 13, because we, at the time when the war was really undecided in the sense that Assad wasn't really getting ahead. This is before the Russian intervention that bailed him out in 2015. There was still a willingness of all the sides to figure out some possible mediated solution, some form of power rotation. And this was all happening behind the scenes. And our participation was that we were working with a group of young people identified by each group, essentially, and took them out of the country and prepared them for future leadership if the killing ever stopped. That was the work at the time. It later on came to a crashing halt when the war tipped and Assad no longer was in any way motivated in helping. And then you also had the surge of the Islamists from Iraq and other places in late 14. But so in the course of those years, there were some Westerners who were kidnapped. And because we were really active in Syria, and I spent a lot of time there, we were approached several times by families and sometimes by governments to see if we could get information on the missing people. And so this book is one such request that came to me in late 2014, way after we had ended that project, in huge disappointment, actually. And this was an unusual story. And the reason one of the reasons I decided to write it is because it was really contained over 20 days. And it's one of those experiences that brought me into contact with this entire sort of gruesome war and its economy and what keeps this war alive, the war economy, in a really visceral way. And so I decided to write a book about it.
So who was this person that you were meeting with in Paris, and what were they disclosing to you? Who was missing?
Initially, yeah, it wasn't. Didn't make it clear. It turned out ultimately that in the end had a very close family relation to the missing person. He described it to me as the son of one of his closest friends, who had ventured into Syria kind of as an adventurer, not really knowing how dangerous it would be, cross the border, as does happen once in a while. And that everyone was crushed, that no one had received any sign, and that the family also wasn't getting any guidance from the government, from the intelligence community, and didn't really know what to do. Should they make it public? Should they give media interviews? Should they appeal publicly to the Syrian government? What should they do? And initially, I didn't really want to touch it because I didn't have such a close relationship with the person who asked me for this favor, and I also had just had a really crushing experience with a different hostage. And so I really didn't want, but I felt myself kind of roped into it, that before I had a chance to really say, no, thank you, I found myself already in this story.
And then what happened? Did you go there?
Yeah, what happened is I made the first call to a close friend of mine, a Saudi, half Syrian, actually, pretty well-connected person in the region, who used to be a close advisor to the Saudi Crown Prince Abdullah before he became king, a pretty progressive, enlightened person, not only for that region, but in absolute terms. And my first call was to him because he was someone, if he told me don't touch it, either because he had no way to get any information or because there were some unsavory elements to it, for example, negotiations of ransom payments behind our backs and things like that, then I would not touch it. And he got back to me and said that if there was a chance to get information on the missing person, but I would have to meet him in Istanbul. And then from then, if he got the green light to take me further into this, I would probably have to go to Beirut and spend a night with a powerful local leader in Beirut who would then direct me on. And so that's how this whole hunt over these 20 days from throughout the Middle East, from the Middle East to the Persian Gulf, then how that really ensued.
Why won't any governments get involved in this? Why is it that they're hands off with these missing person situations?
This is a really messy question, and it's a bit of an ugly answer, I suppose. It varies. So there's no one answer to this. There are some cases where the governments get involved, usually reluctantly, because many governments, including the US, UK, have an official policy that they don't negotiate with kidnappers and they don't pay ransoms. And of course, the dirty little secret is that in some particular instances, with the right kinds of connections to the right kind of representatives, in the right party in power, and so on, there are ransoms that can get negotiated. They're usually paid by third party, in many cases Qatar. I cannot get involved in those cases, not only because it's illegal under US law and you don't want to get caught in the crossfire, but also because if you ever get involved in a ransom negotiation, the expectation is you'll always be able to deliver a ransom in future cases where you have to help. And in most cases, you can't. The governments don't really want to get involved because there is no real good outcome for the governments. First of all, most people who get kidnapped have not been sent by the governments. They've either been freelancers, adventurers. One of the dirty secrets of many media companies and newspapers is that they don't like to send their own correspondents into war zones. So they take advantage of freelancers, of students, recent graduates of universities who want to make a name for themselves and think they can, deliver some dispatches or pictures and take on risks they're in no way equipped to take, marching into Yemen, marching into Syria, into Libya, into Congo. And this happens the whole time. It's happening right now. I'm aware of 12 Westerners currently being held in Syria whose names have not been made public, that you cannot find. You cannot Google these people. And so the governments usually say, unless we sent you, you're really running at your own risk. There's a travel advisory at the State Department's website. And so if you go, you're going at your own peril. That's generally the rule. Part of the problem is depending on who's holding the person. Let's say you are in Syria. If it's an Islamist group, Nusra, ISIS, whichever it is, generally it's in the context of a ransom payment. If it's the regime usually plays a really ugly game, which is they claim not to have the person, because the moment they say that they have the person, they expose themselves to sanctions and all kinds of pressures. So there are very few happy outcomes. And the only way, in the case of the regime, that let's say the US government would have any chance at getting an American released is by offering them, the regime, things that they don't want to offer, taking murderers off sanctions lists, unfreezing bank accounts of murderers and their families. And so it gets really messy. So usually the governments, and the US included, tend to say nice things to the families, but don't really provide any help. And in those moments, if already there has been some kind of a public process going on, I usually refuse to get involved because there's very, very little I can do. The only ways to really be effective is if this can happen behind the scenes without the name being made public.
So you were in Syria and you're hunting for this missing boy, and you stumble across. I mean, the figures that you had to deal with. Can you give the best of highlights of some of these very, I guess, shady figures? Is probably a good descriptive word, maybe.
Yeah, the best stuff is the worst stuff, I suppose. Yeah,
right, correct.
Right. There are. I mean, what's really happening is that without giving any spoilers away, what happened to the person? He essentially stumbled into a network of drug dealers, and the thing to realize about Syria is that everything is being traded. It really is a war economy, and this war is being kept alive entirely only by the huge profits that very few people make. And that's, there's no ideology left. Of course, it's also for power, but at the end, it's really for power and wealth. And there are some individuals who are just making astronomical profits who have become not only millionaires and hundreds of millionaires, but also billionaires over the last 10 years. And And so the human trade, meaning not only kidnapped Westerners, but also young girls taken from their villages and sold into sex slavery in the Middle East and in the Persian Gulf in particular, or the Arabian Gulf, is as much part of the war economy as a drug trade. And this, in my case, the young man had stumbled into a network of drug dealers, people who were dealing in this powerful amphetamine called Captagon, which so for me to get any information, I had to ultimately get close to this group of dealers. And there are really kind of anything you could possibly imagine about a horrible person. They embody that, not only callous towards suffering, but actually just making a living on the back of that suffering. And I had to figure out a way, once I did catch up with them, how do I extract that kind of information? These are people who are very powerful. So I can't intimidate them. They're really wealthy. I can't bait them with anything. They're, many times over wealthier than I am. There's nothing I can bait them with. And I had to figure out a way to extract information in a way by manipulating them without being found out. And so that's kind of that's the climax of the book. But that's the difficulty, is you're really not dealing with someone like you and I scheduled to have a conversation, and we can have a polite conversation about an issue, even if we disagree. This is a completely different environment. It's really manipulative. Just because they're bad people doesn't mean they're stupid people, quite the contrary. So I can't trick them into giving me information. I have to figure out a way to get them into a mood where they either want to brag or they want to divulge something that could be useful to me.
Did you have to get them drunk?
Yeah, drunk with their own,
I know.
with their own awesomeness, essentially.
Yes, yeah.
And we just lived through 4 years, or still perhaps, of unbridled narcissism. So yeah, it's the same kind of malignant narcissism syndrome that we encountered in our politics here. It's the same thing there.
And when they're holding somebody hostage or taking somebody, what is their agenda? Whoever in Syria, for instance.
I mean, you have hostages that are traded between warring parties. So there are instances where Nusra rebels catch someone near Aleppo, trade him to one of the militias affiliated with the regime for a profit. They trade him in return for diesel fuel or weapons to the ISIS in Raqqa, and they in turn trade him back to the regime. But this shouldn't really surprise you. I mean, the first thing that Bashar al-Assad did in 2011, when the whole fighting started, other than beat to death a few 15-year-old boys, the other next thing he did is release Islamist prisoners from his prison. The same thing Saddam did when the Gulf War started. The first thing he did is he released people who became essentially the core of ISIS afterwards, together with some Ba'athist army officers who had no job. So, these ideologies are really connected. People who claim that these wars are about religion or about Sunni Shia divide, anything like that, are really out of their minds. It's really none of that there. They all get along just fine. I was in a meeting once in Lebanon many years ago, where I walked into a place where the leaders of the Sunni, Druze, Christian, and Shia groups were all having dinner together. And by day, they were bashing each other's heads, and by night, they were sharing a meal. So this is not
only in Lebanon.
Maybe only in Lebanon, yeah. Maybe perhaps I wish we should take an example and figure out the way to talk to each other, yeah. But so humans were just traded that way for a profit or for a chip or as a barter. And so I've witnessed the trades of hostages or young girls in return for heating fuel. You really see that. So it's really just a commodity. They've entirely turned just these people into assets. And those who are worst off and suffered the worst fates are the ones who really have no value.
So if it's somebody who's Western and these, whoever takes them as hostage knows very well that the Western governments are not going to get involved, does the value go down? I mean, is it these independent kind of negotiators, hostage negotiators, and folks like yourself who make them valuable?
It depends on who has the person. So the most dangerous thing you can do is increase the value and then not be able to deliver because again, we're in an environment where I can't pay ransom. So the first thing I tell families is please don't rush to the media before we know who has them. There are some very rare instances where it can help to create some public pressure, but it's very rare and usually only in connection with prisoners who are held by the regime. And even there, it's very rare. You have to get very lucky with a constellation of how that might lead to something. You have to have something in return that you can trade them for. Now, in the case of the various opposition groups, all the way from Free Syrian Army secular groups to Nusra, which is the Al Qaeda affiliate, to ISIS, which is started in Iraq and obviously made its way into Syria, it's very different. Sometimes when they feel like they have a high value prisoner, they will execute him for shock value. It's kind of and create recruiting videos for their own people. So you have to be generally creating some kind of an illusion that this is a high value asset is very, very dangerous for the person. It's better to say, listen, this person has really no value. What little value he has, I can try to get you something for in the form of some kind of other favor. And that really depends on who the group is. I can't negotiate with ISIS, so the range of groups that have hostages that can lead to good outcomes when you get involved is really small. Most of the times, if I'm lucky, what I can get is proof of life.
Wow, that's super interesting. I did not understand that if a regime is holding somebody, it's a different. I immediately went to when Lisa Ling's sister, what was her? I forgot her name. The journalist was being held in North Korea. That was horrifying. No, she wasn't. Where was that? I can't even remember now. This was like 10 years ago when Bill Clinton went, remember? And yeah. Anyways, I'm just very curious, like, what did they barter at the end of the day? Was it just Bill Clinton? Sometimes. Yeah,
in some cases, when it's a regime, then you might want to do it for good press, but it's very, very rare. And the problem with the regime, in particular the Syrian regime, is you have people who are languishing in Syrian jails for 30 years, Westerners and, of course, many Syrians. And so for them, at some point, releasing the person, which would then provide evidence of all the abuse and torture, not only of the individual, but of others who have been in these dungeons, the regime has no incentive in doing that. So the window for a happy outcome is generally really very small. And the problem with the regime is, for them, you really have to first create the conditions for the release before you even negotiate anything. You have to know that you're talking to someone who has an incentive in making it happen, and then you have to provide them the avenue for complete plausible deniability. So you have to stage it in a way where they can say, this was a militia that claims to be one of ours. It's from the coastal region, but in fact, we have no control over these guys. These guys are all drugged on amphetamines, and so we really, but thank God, with heroic efforts of our intelligence community, we're able to, liberate this person. So you have to sort of play along with that script, and if you can't produce all that in advance of a negotiation, they simply have no incentive in even admitting that they have a person. Once they admit it, the cat's out of the bag, and then it's the pottery barn rule. But then they're responsible for anything that happens to that person. And so it's a really hard thing, and it's a lot of heartbreak involved, because there are very few happy outcomes to these things. I mean, you really want people just not to go into these regions, and what makes me so angry again is that you have people who just are starry-eyed and think it's just an adventure. It's like just kind of hiking the Appalachian Trail, and don't really understand how gruesome, how medieval it is, and how senseless the killings. In other words, I know doctors and aid workers who asked people from Turkey to take him to a field hospital in Aleppo just to treat children who got kidnapped by the same groups that they were trying to help. So this is not rational anymore. It's a country that's been completely obliterated. So most people who go into Syria really just don't understand the risks that they're taking. The same thing goes for many journalists, especially freelance journalists.
As somebody who has worked in Libya, I will tell you, I would not go there if you offered me $7 million at this point. And you say starry-eyed, and I was young and did not understand where I was going, or at least I wasn't, the information that was being provided to me when I was working for the organization. And weeks after we were forced to leave, the beheadings on the beach by ISIS happened. So, sometimes it's, as you know too well, it's like things can change in a snap. The security situation can change in a snap. And unless you're, even the most sophisticated analysis of a situation, it's like an air, something changes in the air.
And just one thing on Libya, because we're really active in Libya. And even there too, you really have to have you have to really know where you can go and where you can't go. You might be able to go to Tripoli, but you're not going to be able to go to Sirte. You certainly can't go to the east because Haftar's word is no good. And you can't go to Benghazi. So unless you really are very familiar and you're comfortable with the local language and you can pick up on nuances and dangers before that, this is we're just not prepared for that kind of an environment. Yeah, it's very hard.
We did not go east. That was definitely a rule.
Right.
But, we went to Sabratha, which was supposedly safer. And then that's where they beheaded everybody on the beach. So, can you say, last question for you is, were you afraid have you ever been afraid of being in a situation in which you could, as the negotiator, be held hostage yourself, taken hostage yourself?
Yeah. I mean, if I wasn't afraid and didn't have the ability to be afraid, I wouldn't be alive. I mean, it's only a silly person would say he or she's not afraid. But I took all the precautions I could. There were two situations where I had to sort of surrender myself. One was the night in Beirut where I had to give up all my phone devices or any kind of connection to the outside world. But I knew that the person who had arranged for it was is a person is a dear friend. I've trusted him. I would trust him with my life for many years. And he arranged it and guaranteed I'd be safe. And that was good enough for me. And then the only other situation where I didn't control it, where I didn't really control the escape routes, and the person was the sort of final conversation with the head drug dealer, where I had to take the risk of meeting him and wasn't entirely sure whether had been warned about me, because I had to work my way to him through his associates. And it wasn't clear to me whether he had been warned. Fortunately, he hadn't been. And there was a little moment where I did map out a contingency plan with friends there, but there was certainly a certain risk I was taking there. Those were the two moments in the course of these 20 days where, where I took a certain risk that might be reckless in a particular context.
Daniel, you have a certain level of courage that I do not have. This is a fascinating story. Fascinating line of work. You can check out Daniel Levin's book, Proof of Life, 20 Days on the Hunt for a Missing Person in the Middle East. Super interesting. Really appreciate your time, joining us today. Published by Algonquin Books, too. I think we have the book up on screen right now, and so you can check it out. We'll put the information in our info section so people can purchase it right away. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Nomiki. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Take care. All right, we will be right back with our amazing panel. We have Natalie Shure and Jordan Zakarin here. What is going on, Jordan? What is
he's like seized control of my mind, so I wanted to give it a visual.
Oh, welcome back. We have Jordan Zakarin here, who's freaking me out right now. Jordan is, of course, a media producer with a More Progressive Union. He is also the founder of Progressives Everywhere newsletter. Natalie Shure is a writer here. You've seen her in Jacobin, in these Times, The Nation, The Atlantic, BuzzFeed, Los Angeles Times, etc., Daily Beast, all the places. Natalie, you were out of the curve. You told us not to wear, we didn't have to wear the masks outside. And then Joe Biden was like, that Natalie woman, I don't listen to many progressives, but I'll listen to her. So maybe you've got his ear.
Yeah, I mean, I wish he would have taken something else seriously before the mask outdoors recommendation. That wouldn't have been my number one thing. But sure, Mr. Biden, I hope you appreciate the column.
All right, guys, we have a crisis on Capitol Hill right now with a woman named Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm like glad that at least they're trying to censor her, but like she, of course, made remarks about the Holocaust just a couple of days ago, in which her own party called out. So let's show what Brad Schneider, his representative from Illinois, said about Marjorie Taylor Greene.
I'm going to focus on what she said here with respect to the Holocaust. She's equating the national response to a pandemic to the murder of 6 million Jews. That is reprehensible and needs to be called out, and she should be censured for this. Do I think she should be expelled from the House? Absolutely. But at this moment, the tool we have is censure, and I'm hoping we will bring it to the House floor when we get back.
Sorry, I have not mastered Zoom after all this time. So, will censoring Marjorie Taylor Greene make a difference in her behavior, in her colleagues' behaviors? Is it likely to happen? I mean, her own party called her out. Kevin McCarthy issued a strongly worded statement about her yesterday and then blamed the Democrats for it for some reason. I'll go to Natalie first. What do you think? Is this going to make a difference, and will it prevent others from acting like she has recently?
Well, I would say the answer to both questions is pretty unequivocally no. And I think that Marjorie Taylor Greene illustrates a problem that the GOP has more and more and will have going forward, which is that it has these outrageous lunatics running for office specifically to get media attention, that they are feeding off of this exact sort of controversy and all of the clicks and comments and likes it generates, and that they've sort of mastered that ecosystem, which is how they got elected. So they have a completely bizarre set of incentives, and a lot of people say, just stop paying attention to them, which, a lot of people did with Trump too. And he's definitely the one who I think pioneered this particular model, at least this iteration of it that we're seeing for the past couple of years. But it's awfully difficult to just ignore the president or a prominent national lawmaker. So I don't really know what the answer is there, but I don't know how you can, censure Marjorie Taylor Greene in a way that affects her. Because she's looking for people to be mad. She's looking for attention. Yeah. And she's one of the most successful small dollar fundraisers, as far as I understand, in congressional history because of it. So it's a doozy.
Well, it's interesting you say that because, she will definitely become a martyr as a result. And I'm sure her fundraising will increase. And then it might likely weaken their ability to do it again when it's needed. But Jordan, if you're going to censure Marjorie Taylor Greene for anything, would it be this or something else? Or no, but really, is she going to be a martyr now? Is this kind of where she's going?
She's looking to be canceled so she can say she was canceled. Like Rick Santorum got fired from CNN after 5 years of racism. And then he went on Newsmax or some other garbage channel and said, this is cancel culture. So this is what she wants. It's what they're doing. The thing is, it's not just an isolated incident. She's been touring around with Matt Gaetz, who is like a sex predator, and the Republican Party has not kicked him out, has not stripped him of his roles, even though they did Liz Cheney, who, again, not a martyr. Liz Cheney's awful, but the Republican Party is built to reward this. The entire Democratic system is built to reward this due to gerrymandering and creating safe districts for people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. To win a primary in her district, you have to be out of your mind. That is the bar that she sets. You have to be out of your mind to win a primary in her district. The same thing with Mo Brooks, Andy Biggs, or whatever their name is. All those people, their job is to be insane to raise money. And they keep dragging the party to the right. And until, again, there's democratic reform and filibuster and gerrymandering, none of it's going to change. And in fact, Democrats, the media also kind of plays into it because they'll keep showing it on Morning Joe. They'll keep showing it on all these places. And again, like Natalie said, you can't ignore it because it's there and it's happening, but they allow people like this to set the terms of the debate, right? At the same time that they say it's anti-Semitic to oppose Israel killing people, they allow Republicans to say that. They also allow Republicans to say this, to say, have Marjorie Taylor Greene say, right. This is the Holocaust. So they get the terms of the debate, and they also get the terms of democracy. And so the only way to stop it is to change both things.
I love that. Related, speaking of working with the crazies and the filibuster and democracy reform, we have our senators Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. The what is that thing where like they team up as buddies? That buddy show. Remember that show? Bosom Buddies. Yeah, the bosom buddies of the Senate. I was going with something, but I don't know where it is. Sure. You know when you're like in the middle of a thought and you're like, oh, that thing, and then it just fleets out halfway through your sentence. You're like, oh God.
Every time on the show.
It's been a day, guys. It's been a day. So they were on MSNBC talking about their willingness to work with Republicans because this is the party. This is the party you should be working with at this moment. Let's play that clip.
While two of the Democratic holdouts on abolishing the filibuster, Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, released a rare joint statement urging their Republican colleagues to, quote, work with us, adding that the commission is a, quote, critical step to ensuring our nation never has to endure an attack at the hands of our countrymen again. But Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is still not on board.
I think this is a purely political exercise that adds nothing to the sum total of information. It doesn't allow anyone to get away with anything. All of these aspects of it are being dealt with in one way or another already.
So, Willie, one person who strongly disagrees with that and has let Mitch McConnell know that, based on my reporting, is Senator Joe Manchin, who has told several Republicans that he wants to work with them. He is bending over backwards to negotiate with them, bending over backwards to make sure there's bipartisanship. And Joe Manchin's opinion, based on several sources, is, okay, we can debate the outlines of an infrastructure bill. I get that. We can debate the outlines of a police reform bill. Different people have different views. We can debate COVID relief, but for Joe Manchin, he believes this is about he believes that this is not about politics. This is about America. This is about the country. This is about protecting what is most sacred. I don't know. Based on what I'm hearing, Joe Manchin expects Republicans to meet him halfway and not block this 9/11 style commission.
There's no question about it, and he doesn't want to go to the nuclear option and get rid of the filibuster. He wants to talk this out and get 60 total votes for this, which would mean he needs 10 Republicans on board. And you have to ask, Joe, what are Republicans afraid of? If you look inside the proposal, inside this plan, the commission calls for a 10-person panel split evenly between.
Yeah. All right, Jordan, let's go to you first. What on earth is Manchin's end game here? Where's he going?
With him and Sinema, I don't know if it's they're foolish or it's like a kink and they love being shamed and fooled and just called out and made idiots of. I mean, they got to know that this is not going to happen. They have to know. So they're either performing and acting like, oh, we tried, but we can't do it. Or they just love being punished. I don't know what it is, because we're at the point where whatever it is, they just look stupid. Unless they get off on that, maybe I don't know, but they just look stupid and pathetic and sad. And again, we just talked about Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm going to bring everything back to voting rights reform. This is all going to go down the drain unless they move on that. And I'm kind of baffled. I think about it all the time. As you can see, I had Joe Manchin behind me, and at some point, I think Democrats need to start putting pressure on them publicly. I know they're trying to give them their space to act like, yes, we are going to give you time to be bipartisan and whatnot. If they can't get if they can't get the January 6th commission to move on that, you think they're going to move on voting rights? Do you think they're going to move on any of that? And I think it's going to come down to actual Democrats, other than Chuck Schumer, coming out and putting pressure on both publicly and inside the caucus, because there are some Democrats that are a little squishy on a lot of the things before the People Act and infrastructure, that they want to bring back the SALT tax exemption. They want to not have the corporate tax rates raised. It's going to take the rest of the Democrats to come together and put the pressure on. I'm almost less annoyed by Manchin and Sinema because I know they're idiots and weirdos than the rest of the Democrats hiding behind them. And I think that's what it's really going to take.
Yeah, it's interesting because, the messaging could be very much around very easily you're empowering Marjorie Taylor Greene. You're empowered by your actions or failure to act and your refusal to take on the filibuster. You are not empowering yourself. You are empowering the crazies who literally seized the Capitol, and you don't even want to go and investigate that as well. Natalie, what do we do about these two? And obviously, this was reported today in Politico. Manchin even said that he has his own little internal caucus that is willing to back him up on other issues if the filibuster were to be ended, which is great news. Great news. He basically threatened like, oh, it's not just me. But what do we do about that?
Yeah, I mean, going back to what I was saying about Marjorie Taylor Greene and, media incentives, I think that Joe Manchin has those to some degree too. I mean, I think that he is absolutely relishing his role as the, center's gatekeeper, as the person who has been in the media, as far as I can tell, more than at any point in his career because of his position on the filibuster and his position as, the most moderate hinge vote in the Democratic caucus. And so I think that, to some degree, I don't necessarily think that he's specifically a fiend for media attention as an endpoint in itself, the way that Marjorie Taylor Greene is. But I do think that he relishes his brand as, a bipartisan deal maker in the Senate, which, I think bipartisanship, I don't worship it because I think it leads to undesirable political outcomes. I'm not a centrist, but what's funny about Manchin is, he worships it institutionally. I think that he thinks that there is a sacrosanct value to bipartisanship as it works in the Senate, as if all of America is sitting in the Senate and has the same reverence for its rules and norms as he does. Obviously, I wish there was something that Joe Manchin wanted enough to decide to nuke the filibuster over it, but I don't think he does, because I don't think that he's a politician with specifically political or ideological goals. And so, how to push someone like that into nuking one of the norms of the institution that he is specifically enjoying as an end of itself, I'm not sure how that works. If you wanted this commission more, I would personally say, gosh, I'd rather have the PRO Act, I'd rather have minimum wage, I'd rather have any number of things that we are very close to 50-51 votes on. But God, if he wants the January 6th commission, I'd say, okay, then kill the filibuster over that. But he doesn't want it enough. He doesn't want anything enough. And it's very stymieing.
That's a fascinating take. So we have to figure out, what is it that he cares about enough? Cole. All right, that's something to brainstorm on. Maybe
Legacy.
That's the strategy. Legacy, Robert Byrd's
old Klan hat. You reward him with that. I'm actually more confused by Kyrsten Sinema, given what's happening in Arizona. West Virginia, to some degree, is, for Democrats, a bit of a lost cause. Maybe Manchin thinks, well, I'm not going to get reelected, or, I'm a special case because I got reelected already. Arizona is out of its mind right now. Republicans are stripping the Secretary of State, hope potentially of her, just basically her roles, her ability to defend lawsuits or pursue lawsuits. The recounts going forever, and they're just making things up as they go. They are out of their minds there. They're passing, so many voter suppression laws. Sinema seems to be a very transactional and ambitious politician. She is basically begging to not be reelected because Democrats aren't going to support her. There was just a vote that was like 80% of Democrats said, please kill the filibuster to get things done. And the elections are going to be rigged anyways. There's going to be partisan gerrymandering. There's going to be voter suppression. There's going to be an entire part of the Arizona legislature that doesn't even certify results. They're going to be in charge of that. And so that's what baffles me. Joe Manchin is like a head injury, walking head injury. He's just confusing, and I don't know. But Kyrsten Sinema is playing like 3D chess, and not even playing on like
in outer space.
Yeah, I don't even know what she's doing.
It's like it's floating. The chess pieces are in the air.
It's like somebody's putting up a giant boulder in front of her, like her her car ride, and she just like, well, maybe I'll just crash into it. It doesn't make any sense to me instead of going around it.
I'm really curious what her approval ratings are in Arizona, and and I'm pretty familiar with Arizona. I don't know one person who likes her, so I'm really curious. I mean, I'm not talking about like personal, but I mean politically, people who are in office, who are involved in the party. Very curious how this is gonna play out and who's gonna challenge her. I really hope it's a strong Latina woman. That would be, in my mind, ideal. All right, guys, we got to wrap. Jordan's got to go work. Natalie, I'm sure, has to go work. Dorsey has to go to the Knicks game. And so we won't have a producer. Yes, the Knicks game. Real life events. Real life events are back.
Oh, don't be sorry. I'm jealous.
Don't be sorry.
Don't be sorry. I'll do some shout outs. Thanks, guys, for joining us. We'll see you very soon. Kyler Asado says, I wonder what Sherrod Brown, chair of the Senate Banking Committee, is doing and saying on this. He can use this opportunity to help pick up another Senate seat. I assume that's in reference to the opening about Elizabeth Warren, but I'm not sure. Fascinating. Good question. Shout out to everybody in the live chats, all of our moderators. Thank you for keeping the space troll free. Thank you for working those algorithms. We're going to have a great show tomorrow on Thursday. I know that we have Dr. Jim Zogby, who's going to be talking about the conflict in the Mideast, the history there, and what is potentially going to happen. He is somebody that the Zionists have taken on for years. I always love talking to Dr. Zogby. He's back on the show tomorrow. And then later we have Arun Chowdhury and Rep Rab here because it's Thursday. We will see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Stay in solidarity. Oh, and shout out, happy birthday to Mike, one of our producers.
The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. Yeah. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show.